What's up, beautiful people? My name is Brian, and I moved to France 3 years ago from the United States as a student without any financial support from my family. If you're dreaming of studying in Europe, but your family isn't on board and won't sponsor you, I'm here to tell you how I made it on my own and how you could do the same thing. By the end of this video, you might be surprised at how affordable studying in Europe can be, and you might also realize that it's an option that you never knew existed. Before we start, I might miss some details here and there, so if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments down below, and I'll respond to you as best I can. If this video helps you out, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really makes a difference. With all that said, let's get into it. So about how I moved to France in the first place, at the end of my junior year, I transferred to a public university in Lyon called Université Jean Moulin Lyon 3, or Lyon 3 for short, after spending a semester there as an exchange student in spring 2022. If you've never heard of Lyon, it's actually the third largest French city, and it's in the southeast, right next to the Alps. It's also the closest major French city to the city of Geneva in Switzerland. So you never hear about American students transferring to a European university because it's normally pretty impossible to transfer your credits internationally like that, and also because Europe uses their own framework for college credits called the ECTS. In my case, I got extremely lucky because this university at the time had a one-year program for the final year of undergrad that was based on international business, and they were very eager to have international students like me on board because that was one of the program's biggest selling points to local French students. The program was also fully taught in English, which is a very important factor because programs that are taught in French are definitely not accessible at all to most international students. One-year programs like these are called licence 3 in French, or L3 for short. Licence means bachelor's degree, and the 3 stands for the final year of undergrad because college in France only lasts for 3 years. They exist primarily for French students who had completed a BTS, or at the time, a DUT, and these are 2-year technical diplomas that don't traditionally lead to a full bachelor's degree. Think of them as the French equivalent of an associate's degree. And so programs like these serve as a third-year add-on to help these students earn a full bachelor's degree. If you're looking to transfer to a French university like I did, instead of just looking specifically for one-year L3 programs like this, you could also just apply for the second or third year of an undergraduate program. Yes, that is an option for a lot of programs here, and it's pretty much the same thing. Since the school I transferred to was a public university that also exempted non-EU students from paying higher tuition fees, I only had to pay around 270 euros for the entire year. Crazy, right? And so of that 270 euros, 170 was for tuition and the other 100 was for the CEVEC, which is a mandatory student and campus life contribution that all students in France must pay annually. Of course, getting into this program was how I obtained my student visa, which allowed me to live in France for at least a year after I moved here. Now that you know how I moved to France, let's talk about how I actually afforded the move and how I managed to continue covering my expenses while living there. First of all, I saved up as much money as I could by working my ass off as a server for the entire summer before moving to France in September 2022 for the start of the program. From May to August of that year, I worked in 2 different restaurants in New York City for up to 13 hours a day, 5 days a week. And over the course of these 3 months, I made almost $20,000 net. And while I don't think I managed to save more than half of that, it was enough for me to live pretty comfortably in Lyon for at least my first 4 months there. I was also able to save a lot on housing because my girlfriend, who was the main reason I moved to France at the time, she let me move in with her, so I was really lucky. And in exchange for not paying rent, I agreed to cover most of our groceries. Well, while this wasn't the case for me, if you rent your own room or if you rent your own apartment as a student in France, you can apply to the CAF for student housing aid. Pretty much all of the other international students I knew applied for it. The process was really easy, and it actually helped subsidize a big chunk of their rents. My savings started running out at the 4-month mark though, so I had to get a job while studying, and I ended up getting a job at multiple restaurants in Lyon under the Paul Bocuse group as an extra, which is basically a combination between a runner and a busser. So me not being fluent in French at the time wasn't a big issue, since the job was mostly manual and I had minimal spoken interaction with customers. So pro tip, if you need to get a job in France as a student and you can't speak much French, try to see if you can work as an extra. I took about 2 shifts per week, and per hour the pay was 14 euros gross, or about 12 euros net, and which is still several euros above the minimum wage. And so it helped a lot to cover my living expenses. When the time came to look for an internship, which was a requirement to graduate from the program, I got lucky yet again. Despite barely being able to speak French and having almost no knowledge of professional French at the time, I got hired by a PR agency. Shout out to Joanna for the opportunity. I really appreciate you and what you did for me. And shout out to Jan and Isabel as well for taking a chance on me. I earned €4.05 per hour during this internship, which was full-time and lasted 6 months. The pay sucked, but since I worked so many hours, it did help somewhat to cover my living expenses. The most important part of this internship, though, is that it forced me to finally become fluent in spoken French. And at the end of the internship, the agency actually offered me a part-time position, which I of course accepted. My pay got bumped up from €4.05 per hour to €14 gross per hour. Again, about €12 net. And I could only work 5 days a month. I almost forgot to mention that throughout this internship and even after when it became part-time work, I never stopped picking up restaurant shifts as an extra. So I was always working multiple jobs at the same time. Depending on how many shifts I could pick up and whether I received performance bonuses for my job in PR, my total net pay each month would range from €800 at the very, very least to more than €1,500 for an exceptional month. While working all these jobs allowed me to stay afloat financially, I had to find a way to keep living in France legally after graduating with my bachelor's because my student visa was only valid for 1 year. The easiest way to extend my visa was to keep studying, and so I enrolled in a master's program which started in September 2023. After using my enrollment to apply for an extension, my 1-year student visa got upgraded to a 2.5-year residence permit, or a titre de séjour in French. In France, master's programs cost a lot more than undergraduate programs, at least for non-EU students, and especially at private universities. A master's program at a public university would run you at least €4,000 to €6,000, and a private university could cost up to €30,000 or more. And so, by far, the most affordable way of doing this is to find a master's program that's based on work study, or alternance in French, where you find a company that covers your tuition in exchange for hiring you as an apprentice. Programs like these typically follow one of two schedules. You either work 3 weeks per month at the company with 1 week for classes, or you work 3 days per week with 2 days for classes. And you do this for 2 years before graduating. Personally, I didn't like the idea of being forced to maintain such a grueling and rigid routine for 2 whole years, even for free tuition. Plus, these programs are heavily geared towards French students because almost all of them are taught in French, and French companies are also kind of reluctant to take on international students as apprentices. So I ended up choosing a shorter and more flexible master's program that was taught in English, where I only had to take classes for 2 semesters, followed by a 6-month internship, and this allowed me to graduate in only 18 months. Naturally, this option was much more expensive, and so I had to take out a loan to pay my tuition. To continue covering my living expenses throughout my master's, I kept working both of the jobs that I mentioned before. However, I eventually had to drop both of these jobs because I had to move to Brussels for the internship that I needed to graduate from my master's. This internship was also for 6 months, and I was paid €980 net per month, which was barely enough to live on. But I was very fortunate because my girlfriend decided to move with me to Brussels, which allowed me to continue saving on rent. If that hadn't been the case, I definitely would have stayed and done an internship in France instead. Fast forward to today, and now I'm back in France again after finishing that internship. I'm about to graduate from a master's, and I have a little less than a year left before my residence permit expires, which means that I'll have to find a full-time job before then in order to extend it and keep living here in France legally. We'll see how that goes. So my story's been about moving to France specifically, but I'm pretty confident that you can do what I did in other European countries as well. In fact, I'd argue it's even more doable in countries like Germany or Belgium, where public universities are much cheaper, not to mention many countries in Eastern Europe where the cost of living is much lower as well. Honestly, it's been quite hard supporting myself while studying full-time in Europe for several years, but I have no regrets. The number of cultures that I've been exposed to here, the sheer diversity of the people that I've met, the languages I've learned, and the memories that I've made here are truly priceless. If studying in Europe is something you're set on, but you're not sure whether or not you can afford it, I'm telling you right now that it's probably more doable than you think. if you're willing to work for it like I was. If you want it bad enough, you can absolutely make it happen. Good luck.